Okay, grab your Bibles and keep them open. We'll be in 1 Samuel 16 through 17 today. Last week we witnessed the beginning of Saul's fall. He had a good short run. Today we're going to encounter a handsome country boy named David. Country boy. Yes. There are lots of cool literary things in today's story and references back to things we've already read or things that we've already talked about on Sunday morning. So that's going to be something for you to keep your eyes open about. But in this case, I want to remind you about a couple of things of Saul's rise from a couple sermons ago that you'll see why later. So let's do that table. There we go. Yes. So I'll come back to this later. These are some important, notable moments I want you to kind of remember from Saul's rise. Handsome and tall, described that way. Chasing donkeys. Samuel's told to anoint him. We get that phrase, this is the one I've chosen by God. Notes of humility, and this is like easy to miss, but he's like, I'm from a small tribe. My family's not that important, blah, blah, blah. He says those things. He's surprised he's even chosen. Anointed by Samuel. Filled with the Spirit. Goes back to farming. He's back in his field before the snake thing happens, before Nahash. Notable victory against Nahash, and then people very publicly accept him as king. So these are very notable moments that you can go back and read and remind yourself of. And I'm going to talk about some of those later, and I'll put this back up later. But I just wanted to remind y'all of some of the things that have happened, partly because we don't get to focus on everything every time. And so Nathan had a lot to cover whenever he preached about that. So let's start in chapter 16. We're going to read that first sort of section 1 through 13, and it's not going to be behind me, so because I did not get those made and sent to Sarah. Copying and pasting these huge chunks of text is not that hard, but but I couldn't do it. Okay, so open or tap to this area. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, because I have selected for myself a king from his sons." Samuel asked, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me." And the Lord answered, "Take a young cow with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. And then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what you are to do. You're to anoint for me the one I indicate to you." Samuel did what the Lord directed and went to Bethlehem. When the elders of the town met him, they trembled and asked, "Do you come in peace?" "In peace," he replied. "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and said, "Certainly, the Lord's anointed one is here before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I've rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart." Jesse called Abinadab and presented him to Samuel. "The Lord has not chosen this one either," Samuel said. Then Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." After Jesse presented 7 of his sons, Samuel told Jesse, "The Lord hasn't chosen any of these." And Samuel asked him, Are these all the sons you have?" "They're still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but right now he's tending the sheep." Samuel told Jesse, "Send for him. We won't sit down to eat until he gets here." So Jesse sent for him. He had beautiful eyes and a healthy, handsome appearance. And the Lord said, "Anoint him, for he is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David from that day forward. And then Samuel set out and went to Ramah. Okay, so some interesting things here in this section. One, Samuel's still mourning Saul. This whole experience has been, interesting whiplash for him, and also he had to have some hard combos with Saul. And, I think the fact that he's mourning for him shows that he wanted him to succeed. He was rooting for him. They had become close in some way, but also he's representing what God's trying to do in Israel, and it was even a lot for Samuel to have to hear the people want a king. So it's just a lot going on that Samuel's like, just still processing and mourning, and God's saying, let's keep this going, let's keep moving. We get some interesting stuff right here with the selection, going through all the sons, everyone, including Samuel, not guessing correctly who God sees as preferable to be king. Surely it's this one, surely it's this one, surely it's this one. And it's none of them, not even though they don't even bring David for some reason. They don't even think it's important to have him in the room. They're just like, he's such an afterthought here. And we get this really cool, very important that I want you to hold in your mind. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but God sees the heart. Let's put that little phrase up there. But God sees the heart. This is the point. This is the thing I want to revolve around this morning. But God sees the heart. So remember a few chapters ago, whenever Samuel's rebuking Saul, we got some foreshadowing about this in chapter 13. The Lord has found a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him ruler over his people, because you have not done what the Lord commanded. So this word came to Samuel, but even he didn't really know what it looked like for someone to have a heart, to be a man after God's own heart. But we were told this was going to happen. So I want to talk a bit about the word heart, because it has some connection to the way we think about the word heart in our day, but it's not exactly the same. So let's go to that heart one. Yeah. So this is the word levav or lev in Hebrew. And one notable difference, you'll see the middle one there is, feeling emotions like fear and joy, etc. But it's also talked about, we don't have a lot of evidence of this, like a word for like brain or something like that, where you do a lot of your thinking and understanding and processing the way we might talk about it now. We kind of separate. We got different organs for different things, that represent different deals. The way that the word heart is used is meant to encapsulate all three of these kinds of things: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. We see this a lot in Proverbs, that not just feelings, but understanding and knowledge and wisdom would come from the heart and be sort of processed there. Our desires would come from the heart. That seems relatable to us. That's also where we make choices, though, as well. It's like, I think sometimes we're like, our desires in our heart, but I got to use my brain to like make the decisions. Like, well, our heart is actually just pumping blood. So it's actually not, we're not actually feeling our emotions here. It's all representative. But this is important as we think about and really center this point around God sees the heart. God sees the heart. This is a lot of important things happening in this symbolic piece of our heart that is going on internally in us, where we know, understand, where we gain wisdom, where we feel things, where we make choices and have desires. And I think another thing that's important to know is this isn't just like a distillation of character for all time, where God's saying like, David was born good. He's born with a better heart than other people. Like some people are born good or some people are born bad. Because we know this because basically every other character in the Bible proves this to us. They have good times and seasons where their heart seems to be right, and they have bad ones, spoiler alert, including David later. So it's not something preset in stone, but it is of vital importance to God. What is your heart like right now? So this is something that, just some things to think about as we really center around God sees the heart. The next section in chapter 16, we're not going to read, but I'm going to summarize it for you. This interesting scenario where Saul has a spirit that is making him angry and have animosity. There's a lot of different thoughts about what this is. Some scholars compare this to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Now that David has been anointed and has the Spirit of God in him, it is not in Saul. And so there's this hardening of his heart, a spirit of animosity there, that now that God's Spirit is no longer with him. And so he's getting these angry fits and acting weird, and so they try to find somebody who can play music to soothe him. And I think what's interesting about this is that we get David coming in to do this job, to calm down the king. But I wish we had some idea of like what kinds of songs David liked to sing, Gosh, I wish that detail wasn't left out, If only we could guess. What did he like to write? What would he have been singing? Who knows? We'll never know. JK, Psalms. It's like, you think he was just playing the top 40, there hanging out in Saul's presence. He's singing these wonderful worship songs that he's been writing. I think it's a good guess, at least. And so this spirit, this absence of God's presence, David comes in and is reminding, singing these songs, reminding of who God is, what kind of God he is. And the fact that would calm Saul down seems very relatable and makes a lot of sense to me. The fact that would chill him out and bring him some peace, I think is not too far-fetched. Okay, so can't go way into that, but pretty cool. So chapter 17, the chapter is surprisingly long, and it would actually take at least 10 minutes to read on its own. It is like a beefy chapter. But it's important. It's, we've heard the story growing up, most of us. It's really important piece in the narrative. It's allotted a lot of time, So I'm sure you've read it. I want to ask you to read it again with some care this week. But today I'm going to read a more sort of abridged storytelling version that I found to help refresh your memory and still get us into like the story mode. This is a story, very action-packed one that we need to like get our heads in and experience. So the armies of Israel and Philistia stood entrenched on opposite hills, the valley of Elah stretching like a yawning chasm between them. For 40 days the earth trembled beneath the heavy footfalls of Goliath of Gath, a giant of towering might, his armor glinting like snake scales beneath the sun. His spear was a monstrous thing, its iron tip gleaming with a deadly sheen. His shield-bearer marched before him like a harbinger of doom. Each day his voice thundered across the valley. I defy the ranks of Israel. Send me a warrior to face me. If he conquers, we shall be your slaves. But if I strike him down, you will serve us forever. His laughter rumbled like distant storm clouds. The men of Israel shrank before him. The king offered honor and riches, but none dared challenge the Colossus. Then on a day like any other, a youth came wandering into camp, David the shepherd of Bethlehem. He bore neither sword nor armor, only bread for his brothers, and a sling at his side. When he heard the giant's taunts, a fire kindled in his chest. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? He asked. His brothers scorned him. Why have you come, young shepherd? Go back to your flocks. But word of his defiance reached King Saul, and David was summoned before the weary ruler. Let no man's heart fail because of this Philistine, David declared. I will fight him. Saul beheld the youth and shook his head. You're young. Goliath has been a warrior from his youth. But David's voice did not waver. I've slain lions and bears that came against my father's flock. The Lord delivered me then, and he will deliver me now. Seeing his resolve, Saul relented and offered him armor. But the weight of it was foreign, clumsy, like iron shackles upon his limbs. He cast it aside. Instead, he bent low by the brook and chose 5 smooth stones, slipping them into the pouch at his waist. With only a staff, sling, and the fire of faith, he strode into the valley. Goliath beheld the young man approaching and sneered, his lips curling into a wicked grin. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He mocked. His voice dripped with scorn. Come here, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. But David did not falter. His voice rang out clear and unwavering. You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I'll strike you down, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. Then, as the giant took his first thunderous step forward, David ran to meet him. The wind howled through the valley as he reached into his pouch, drew forth a single stone, and set it in his sling. He whirled it once, twice. The air sang with its fury. Then he let it fly. The stone found its mark. It struck deep into Goliath's skull, and the giant's laughter died on his lips. His towering form swayed, then crashed to the earth like a felled oak, his face buried in the dust. For a moment, all was still, and then David ran forward, seized the fallen warrior's own great sword, and with a single stroke, he severed the giant's head from his shoulders. A gasp rippled through the Philistine ranks, and then a cry of terror. Their champion was slain. The mighty army of Gath turned and fled. Israel, once paralyzed with fear, now surged forward with a roar, pursuing their enemies across the valley, cutting them down like chaff before the wind. And so, with a single stone and an unshaken heart, the shepherd of Bethlehem triumphed over the giant of Gath, not by strength, nor by the might of men, but by the power of the living God. Whoa, it's like a little movie right there. It's like, this story is intense. And even as many times as I've heard it and read it, there's something about like making ourselves really get enveloped in the story that's just cool and exciting. There's a lot to talk about here. We can't get to everything, obviously. There's tons of debate about Goliath's height, with some Greek manuscripts saying he was 6'9", which is actually like tall, but like normal. It's like a achievable height that we're kind of aware of, not fantasy story giant. So maybe he's just a tall, strong human. Or maybe he's more than that. We'll never know, really. But we do know his height is notable, and it's important to the author to mention it. Who else has the author seen fit to mention their height? Saul. Yes, Saul. He mentions Saul's height. So maybe Saul would have been a decent match, or at least a pretty good pick to come and fight Goliath. Where's Saul? Yes, in the bunker, yeah. In the decision room or whatever. Yes, he's tall, he's king. Israel wanted a king to go before them in battle, and what's he doing? Trying to reward other people to go and do it instead. Goliath says they're all Saul's servants. That's one of his taunts. And he seems to use that in a negative way, and then that they'll all serve the Philistines if Goliath wins. So it's not clearly evident to Goliath that Israel's king situation is supposed to be different than the other nations. Some of this different than the other nations stuff is supposed to be obvious to the other nations. It's kind of like the point a little bit. It's like they should notice something is different about Israel, but nothing at this moment is different. Saul is hanging back, and to Goliath, everyone appears to be just Saul's servants. So he's not picking up on the idea that king should be like a servant leader. And it's not a surprise here because Saul is not being that kind of leader, and he's just trying to reward people with riches that I guess he's already been able to accrue from people, and he'd rather have other people do his bidding. So very interesting, very notable that height is mentioned about two characters, and in this case, Saul should be the match, but he's not. David comes in hot, very confident. This characteristic is described as arrogance by one of his brothers. But is it? Is it arrogance? The author seems to want to make clear that there's a different explanation here. For one, when they describe the reward of riches and marriage to the king's daughter, David's response is not like, that sounds pretty cool. His response is, who is this Philistine that should defy the armies of the living God? They're talking about rewards and stuff, and he's like, but who is this guy, and why is he defying the armies of the living God? We do see that David's definitely confident in himself. He has some confidence, for sure. But ultimately, he gives credit of that confidence to the Lord, does he not? He's, it'd be almost as similar to me being, confident in this light switch right here. And if you guys had never seen electricity before, and I was like, guys, don't hold me back. If I go and I flip that switch, these lights will turn off. They will. I've seen it hundreds of times. It will happen. And to you, who's never seen electricity before, you'd be like, man, that guy is full of himself. Who is he? He thinks he can just make the light, turn on and go off. Let there be light, let there be dark. Who is this guy? But I know that I'm doing a very little thing right here, right? I'm not the source of power, right? I did not invent electricity. I am not doing anything very impressive. I'm flipping a switch. That's at least I think, somewhat of an analogy we can kind of take for the way that David feels. He's not confident in this, no one can stop me. He has a confidence in the Lord that to other people looks like, wow, You seem so full of yourself. And he's like, no, I know if I do a little thing, God can do a big thing. I've seen it done. What does he say? He's like, God has saved me many times. I've flipped many light switches, and God was the one who got the credit for it. I did not wire this whole building, okay? I'm not paying electric bills here. It's like God is the one doing this, right? I'm doing a small thing. He can do a big thing. And he says he's trusted God many times, but his brothers just think of that as arrogance, which is interesting. He says, God's delivering many, many times. Why wouldn't I expect him to do that again? Especially when someone is flagrantly and tauntingly defying God, right? That's really one of the key things here. Is it just that I can get God to do whatever I want, or is it that someone's really defying God here? And I think God cares about this. So we can contrast David's faith to Saul's. In this situation, we don't see any real evidence of Saul's faith. He's not talking like this, acting like this. Is there anyone in recent chapters who has talked like this and sounded like this? Talked like the way that David's talking. Okay, good. They were doing that, and they hadn't really thought about, there we go. That's what I was looking for. But yeah, you're right, though. There's a confidence without having God's will behind it when they just try to do it on their own. But then we have Jonathan, and he's talking like, well, of course, God's going to give these people into our hands. He does that little sign. If they say this, we'll go up. But he has this confidence that we can defeat these people who are enemies of God if we trust in God. There's like this light switch moment he kind of has. It's like, we can do our little thing, but God's going to do the thing. The battle is the Lord's. So we can do some comparing and contrasting to previous chapters of whose faith is like whose, We see some echoes of the way that Jonathan was talking. We see an interesting lack of the way that Saul should be maybe thinking and talking and leading his country, leading his people, to think about, to have faith in God, and he's not doing that right now. Does that make sense? So David's faith, and he has faith, and he has some real experiences in the wilderness that back this up. Maybe he's not the itty-bitty shepherd toddler that some of us imagine when we think of this story or have heard it as kids or seen little drawings of it, and they make David this little, tiny little guy. He's been fighting and caring for sheep and fighting wild animals. He's got some experience. And maybe, like I mentioned earlier, maybe Goliath isn't the Hulk that we imagined, but this is still an uneven fight on the face of it. David with no armor, no sword, no shield, no war experience. Goliath with armor, a shield bearer, a sword, lots of experience, maybe an extra foot of height or 2 or 5, depending on your translation. So it looks like an uneven fight. It looks like an uneven fight by the way that humans see things. And that's because humans see what's visible. Yes. All of that. Yes, all true. Humans see what's visible, but God sees the heart. Ends up being an absolute blowout, like no contest, right? Just absolutely decimates Goliath. He doesn't even get a scratch. David doesn't even get a scratch on him, right? Goliath falls face down. David goes and cuts off his head. Falling down. No head. Does this remind you of anything? Yes, the idol, Dagon. Who else? This is like all in the same story. We get these interesting echoes of like, in a previous time, in a previous chapter, not that long ago, someone came face to face with God's presence, and they fell down, and their head was removed. Eli fell too. Yes, there's things like this we can echo back to. But the idol, the Dagon idol, falling over in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and its head being removed. We should be seeing some echoes of this. This is the kind of stuff that authors do on purpose to draw our attention to things. Yet another person has been knocked down and is headless when they come face to face with Yahweh or Yahweh's servant. So I want to bring back up, let's do that next table. So we've seen a lot of things now from David's rise. So let's compare. And this is just, again, interesting literary stuff, right? Healthy and handsome, described right out of the gate. He wasn't chasing donkeys, but he was caring for sheep. Samuel's told to anoint him and told that it's God's chosen one. We got notes of humility right out of the gate. Youngest, left out, not even thought to come to the meeting. Tending to sheep, not a noble family. This is the status they have in society. Anointed by Samuel, filled with the Spirit. We get that language very clearly in both cases. Goes back to the fields. What's this deal with being anointed as king and then going back to what you do? Saul's in a field farming when he hears about Nahash. David is back to the fields, going back and forth, playing the lyre and caring for the sheep still, even though he's been anointed. Very interesting. Notable victory against Goliath. We just saw that. And spoiler, later, people publicly accept him as king. So we get this parallel. God's starting over. He's doing it again. A lot of the same things are happening. And then what will be really important is to see what the differences are, what we are starting to see already. So David's rising, and how does he differ, and what ways does he not go wrong in the ways that Saul did? Important stuff to notice as we read. Okay, so what do we do with this section of Scripture? Other than being like, this is entertaining, this is cool, there's some cool quotable things, what do? I hate to break it to you, not everything's a giant that it's your destiny to slay. I wish I could tell you that was the takeaway, but it is not. Because this story, and no story, can describe every scenario in our lives. You know, the Bible is full of stories. Can all of them be an analogy for every moment? Is everything that we come across that's inconvenient or not good a giant, and we are destined to slay it? Can't be true every time. This actually only happened once in the Bible, so it can't be true every time. So how can we understand it then? If Goliath was going to come, and no one, not even the king, was going to step in, what would have happened? Probably not good, right? Maybe Saul finally makes the reward big enough, and someone goes and does it that just wants to be rich. Probably doesn't go well for that person or God's people. So God decides to act. The battle was God's. The battle was his. He wanted to work through someone to accomplish his purpose. It would have been really bad if he hadn't done that. But he sees David. God sees the heart. He sees David's faith and David's heart was in such a state and posture, he saw someone he could work with. David's heart allowed him to be included in God's plan. Yahweh was wanting to work and move, and David's heart allowed him to be involved in that. God sees the heart. This phrase rings out across the story, all of Samuel, and all of Scripture and all of time. It's beautiful, and it's haunting. It's the good news and the bad news. Yeah. What does he see in my heart? What does he see in yours? In mine, he'd see annoyance, impatience, criticism of the self and most people, doubt, selfishness, sleepiness. Is that in the heart? Hurt left untended, callousness, numbness, and much more. How do we get our hearts right? Aligned enough with God that we may see more rightly and hear him and be available to be included in his work. The heart has to come first, or we're just doing what's right in our own eyes, right? Everything is a giant to slay. We're just slinging stones at everything in sight. Whose business are you about? What agenda are you trying to further? Whose skin are you trying to protect? Who are you trying to please or appease? We are very at risk of fighting our own battles for human reasons, or getting high on our own abilities and confidence that we don't even know what God's trying to do or what our part in it would be. We see this everywhere now. People go for make our nation great, or destroy the current power structure so we can make our own, enforce justice, solve this problem or that problem as far as if we know how, and bulldoze anyone who gets in our way. We think we're joining in on shalom work. We don't know what shalom even is. We haven't even asked God what it is. We'd rather get our hands working on something before we know what we're doing, who we are, who God is. We're just reactionary, jumping out there, spilling thoughts and godless chatter, and not going and filling up with anything, spewing fumes. And just because we can see obvious holes in other people's thinking, faith, theology, doesn't mean ours is actually better. Holes are easy to see from far away. Easy. Maybe you don't even know what you're talking about. Maybe I don't. You want to be king of your life? I want to be king of my life? We think we know how to lead something? We can't even lead ourselves, you and I. If we keep stomping around like that, we may get smacked in the forehead with a stone one of these days. We might be the giant needing to be slain. We want to be a hero on day one. Looks great, sounds awesome. But we don't want to be in a field taking care of a bunch of sheep, talking to God, writing songs to him for years, working on our hearts, doing stuff that doesn't seem important to anybody. That just feels like a waste of time to important people like us, you know? We don't want to build and grow our faith. We just want to have it. We just want to be somebody. It doesn't work like that. David trusted God in countless regular days, boring days, no one caring what he was doing. And also in days of bear and lion attacks, when no one saw him save the sheep and trust God. He was never on people's radar. Everyone wants to have the answers. No one wants to sit and listen at God's feet. Sit down. Read God's word. Go pray. Sing a song. Be quick to listen, slow to speak. Lord, help us. God sees the heart. So again, I ask, how do we get our hearts right? Aligned enough with God that we may see more rightly and hear him and be available to join in his work. And that's what this whole apprenticeship to Jesus deal is about, that we've been on about. Apprenticing under Jesus, letting Yahweh be the one to form us. And not once or twice, not back when I was just a little student, that's when I needed. Always. Always. We want God to change our hearts, we have to ask him to do that, and we have to let him. We have to keep letting him. And we're not just individuals. We got to do this together. God sees the heart. And going about the work of our hearts determines everything about us knowing who God even is, about how to be his people, and how to join in and doing his work. It's very important. Yeah. David does not arrive as this action hero. He's been doing what would seem like unproductive heart work for a long time. And I think we need to be doing some unproductive heart work around here sometimes. Yeah. I want to end with Hannah's prayer from chapter 2. I want you to listen just for things that she talks about Yahweh. Things that have been happening in the story since we've read this. Leslie preached about that like 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks ago now. How this prayer has proven true in the story so far, and how it may yet prove truer, not just in the story, but in our world. My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. Yeah. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly, or let arrogant words come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. The woman who's childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with noblemen, gives them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. He set the world on them. He guards the steps of his faithful ones. But the wicked perish in darkness. For a person does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He'll give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of his anointed. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for our sermon podcast. We would love for you to join us on Sunday morning or in one of our small groups during the week. And you can get more information about that at dentonnorthchurch.com.